Hello everyone, I'm Darren Magee. Brian Ingram is a social media influencer and award-winning mental health advocate. He also has quiet borderline personality disorder. Now, Brian and I first spoke in October 2022 about life with what he describes as the scapegoated disorder. Brian and I have a catch-up chat about life since then, how he has been working through things in therapy, building new healthier relationships, and his recent move into comedy. Here's our conversation. I hope you enjoy it. Hello, everybody. With me today is Brian Ingram. If everybody remembers, if anybody's watched previously, Brian and I spoke about a year and a half ago, maybe just under 2 years.
Mm.
Brian has borderline personality disorder. He has the subtype known as quiet borderline. This is characterized by the internalizing of a lot of fault, blame, things like that. It can lead to depression, anxiety, and so on. Catching up with Brian today because life has moved on for Brian, and I think it would be interesting to hear how things have changed for him. Hello, Brian.
Hello, thanks for having me back. Yeah, I can't believe it's actually been that long. Yeah, it's just weird to think that was almost 2 years ago.
Yeah, I've got grayer, as you can see. Um, yeah, so the last time we were talking, it was just prior to you were planning to move. You were not just moving flat, you were hoping to move town as well.
Mhm.
I'm just wondering, life since then, since you've moved, what's been different for you?
So yeah, I moved January 2023, like the end of January. A couple of months after that, broke up with my partner that I was with. And then I think just kind of finding my footing for the past year or so. And yeah, I think like I mentioned, like kind of moving to a different town, which has been I think beneficial for me,
Mm-hmm.
just because where I grew up, there was a lot of kind of trauma from like bullying and family upbringing and stuff, and just even like just walking down the street, like it was just constant reminders of like I'd see people that used to bully me or
Mm.
family members and things like that, and so it was just a constant um, battle in my head, and I think moving has really given me not just time to reflect, but I think also realize certain environments weren't healthy,
Mm-hmm.
for me. So, like, since moving here, I have gone back every now and then to kind of visit some family,
Mm-hmm.
and just realizing that now when I go back, like, that hypervigilance comes back. Like, very anxious, very kind of, like, white knuckling through it, like, an hour feels like it's been 5.
Mm.
Um, I'm exhausted, for the rest of the day, and, um which has helped, I think, in terms of, like, friendships as well, just about started kind of making some friendship groups here, and it's kind of highlighted, the kind of friendships and stuff I had before, in a
Yeah.
sense of like, "Oh, these new people, they're not, like, taking the piss, or they're not kind of putting me down all the time, they're not doing this," and, like, because I used to think that was normal, and, walking away being like, "Oh, I don't feel bad about myself after being around these people," but I think also because yeah, like, moving and then I think especially going through a breakup as well, it was a lot of change,
Mm.
but I think I managed to handle it very well. I have been in talk therapy for about 2 years now, but I think part of the kind of reasoning for me for ending that relationship, I think it was, it just kind of wasn't working out anyway, but I think also I didn't know who I was away from where I lived, where I grew up, my family, and I very felt like I had to discover a new me,
Mm-hmm.
and I think unfortunately that just as a result that meant I had to end a relationship that just wasn't right anymore.
Just
Uh,
wasn't working.
no, and no ill behavior to them or anything, and it was very amicable. But yeah, it just wasn't working anymore.
Well, this is the thing, and I know this is the least romantic sounding thing you'll ever hear. Most relationships have a lifespan.
Mm,
Some might last a weekend, some might last 50 or 60 years, you know. And sometimes two people just might feel differently. They might have different goals in life. You know, it could be anything. But there was something interesting you said a moment ago about when you go back to your hometown, whenever you see people that you remember when you were young, there is something I think in us that whenever we see something or someone that brings up distress in us, it almost feels like we're right back in the same situation.
Mhm,
Yesterday's threat, yesterday's situation is present today. So
mhm,
we find ourselves behaving as if we did, or the way we did when we were back in that kind of environment. But there is also something you said about when you move to the new town and you start to meet new people.
mm,
Because, bad treatment, mistreatment, trauma, things like that, it tends to disconnect us.
mhm.
Uh, the antidote, as odd as it sounds, is other people.
Absolutely,
We
yeah.
we meet
Mhm.
new people, we form new relationships, different kinds of friendship groups, different kinds of relationships. And there is something to be said for when we are just treated like one of the crowd, or even at its smallest level, we're treated just like a normal, decent human being.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a particular point, I think it was like 2013, 2014, where I started to, I guess this might be like the derealization, um, but I slowly started to feel I wasn't human, or that
Mhm.
like I was just put on this earth to just take people's crap.
Mm.
And, you know, um, I'm not gonna say, I've been a saint or anything at all, but it just very much felt, especially when you kind of observe like, "Oh, okay, they're treating me like that, but they're not like that with anyone else."
Mm.
You do start to very much internalize that of like, "Oh, it's because there's something wrong with me." And on the occasional, situation, I have had somebody be like, "Oh, well, it's because you're weird, or it's because of this that people treat you a certain way." And yeah, I think a bit, you talking about like quiet BPD and very much internalizing blame and fault and things. That's something that sort of been working on in therapy at the moment, is kind of my self-worth, and
Mhm.
um because my brain automatically goes to the negative. So I think, obviously, like I
Mm.
reached out to you last year about to do a video, and obviously like you just weren't doing collabs, but I think in my head I'm like, oh, it's because I'm a terrible person and sort of thing. And yeah, I think it just kind of takes me back to kind of
Mm.
school days, or kind of like, oh, people don't want to hang out with you, people don't want to play with you, it's because there's something wrong with you, rather than just, things are happening.
So what I so what I'm hearing from you is when you reached out last year, it was, as if I had rejected you. It was felt as if it was a personal rejection.
Yeah, I think, but I think I am better at kind of like,
Mm.
that's my initial thought,
Yeah.
but then I'm like, no, it's not. I'm sure if there was a problem, something would have been said, or you said, you're just not doing collabs at the moment, and but I think it's just that default that I kind of have to really kind of question, or kind of push it away to be like, no, that it's
You're
not.
able to challenge it.
Yeah, and I think there's even, I think especially with things like social media, because I think I remember messaging you after the last video of being like, "Oh, can you take it down?" Because there's been a few like kind of like horrible comments, and people be like, "Oh, he's playing victim," and all this stuff. And
Mm.
you know, I've had countless therapy sessions with my therapist being like, "I'm so concerned I'm a narcissist. I'm so concerned this," and he's like, "Don't worry, you're not." And I think just because it's very easy, I think social media is kind of double-edged sword. I think because we do have all this information, it helps people do become more aware, but at the same time, we kind of get people being like, "Oh, this person's a narcissist because they left the toilet seat up," sort of thing.
Yeah.
And, it's very hard to kind of, I think, thing is, people are saying, "Oh, don't read the negative comments," but you're not gonna know it's negative till you've read it. But yeah, I think it's, I guess, a part of that lack of sense of self as well, because I'm like, "Okay, yeah, I think I've kind of figured out what's been going on," and then as soon as somebody's like, "Oh, no, you're playing victim, you're doing this," I'm like, "Oh, okay, shit, maybe I have done something."
Yeah. Just
Um,
like I was saying earlier, it's almost as if yesterday's threats present
yeah.
in today. It's like you're right back in that situation. People are doing and saying and behaving in certain ways that's very similar to the way people in the past did.
Yeah, and I think it's very interesting. I think especially talking online about something like BPD,
Mm.
I have had people reach out to me, be like, "Oh, I'm so thankful I found your page because my partner has BPD. I'm trying to learn more about it." There was one particular incident, I think it was on Instagram, where then about a week or so later, like this person messaged me just like going at me being like, "All you people with BPD are abusive, you
Mm.
project your crap onto everyone else." I'm like, "Hang on, but that's what you're doing with me because you're having an issue with your
Yeah,
partner." That's I'm a stranger, I have no say in this. Um, and I think that's the struggle. I think just with mental health in general, unfortunately, I think there's still stigmas around it. Or people just being like, "Oh, I've had this negative experience with this person, so I'm gonna assume everyone is like this,"
yeah,
and um, it's tricky to find that nuance, really. I think especially with I was kind of talking to you before about BPD and comorbidity.
mhm,
Um, there's some, I think even like when I was talking to you just now about the constantly talking to my therapist, being like, "Am I a narcissist?" This sort of thing, and um, with like OCD, where it's like moral scrupulosity,
mhm,
and I think that's the thing that I kind of deal with a lot, where it's constantly like, "Oh, am I a bad person? Should I be doing this? Oh, like if I do this, then that makes me a terrible person." And like a silly example, like when I was with my partner, my last partner, I'd go up to Waterloo to then change to get a train to where he was living, but I would write out a text, but I wouldn't press send that was in Waterloo till like the train stopped because I'd be like, oh well, even if it's pulling in, I'm still lying, so that makes me a liar and I'm bad, so I won't send it. Um, or even like I wouldn't send texts at 13 minutes past because I was like, oh, something bad's gonna happen, and stuff that I think just because of other life things happening,
yeah.
and I think I recognize that a lot of that was more common when I was younger, but I think I must have managed to suppress that 'cause it's sort of coming up again. I think especially now that I'm living alone most of the time, because when I was with my partner, I'd see him quite a lot. Um, but kind of constant things of like, "Oh, is the oven working? Is this" you know, "have I left the hob on?" Checking my doors a lot of times, and, um but yeah, I think definitely dealing with constantly questioning, "Oh, am I at fault here? Oh, was I in the wrong?" And I guess kind of overcorrecting myself.
Second
Um,
guessing yourself.
yeah, and I think especially again, I think with social media in this day and age where it's like, if you're not doing this, if you're not saying that, if you're not doing all this work on yourself, then you're a terrible person, all this. So I so obviously we'll talk about it in a minute, but obviously like I've started doing comedy as well.
Mm.
Um, and that's been a challenge in a sense of like, I know I've got a personality disorder, but I feel like I can't have a personality. Like, 'cause my humor is quite self-deprecating, it is quite dirty, um, but I still kind of carry that kind of shame, I think especially around being gay as well, in a small town where a lot of people are like, "Oh, you're dirty because 'cause you're gay," all
Mhm.
this stuff, and you shouldn't be saying stuff like that, so, really challenging that, "Oh, well, if I make a joke like this, then that means I'm a terrible person," or, "I'm not a nice person because 'cause I'm joking about sex," or whatever, and, kind of feeling like I have to walk a fine line.
It's the fear of other people's judgment.
Mhm,
Yeah, again, comes back to things like our self-worth, our self-esteem. Quite often, it's not so much what I think of me, it's what I think other people are thinking of me.
mhm,
And this is the thing about being the villain, Brian. You're always going to be somebody's villain.
mhm.
I always say, for every billionaire megalomaniac who's trying to take over the planet, James Bond is the bad guy. You know,
Mhm,
you're always going to be someone's villain.
mm,
You just don't be the villain that they claim you are. You don't be the villain that they paint you to be.
mhm,
Having boundaries makes you the bad guy. Do you know what I mean?
mhm. Yeah,
Having a sense of integrity makes you
mhm.
selfish or something. You're always going to be someone's villain.
Yeah, I mean, so I have had, some recent, situations where I kind of have set a boundary or I've kind of called out something, like I was gaslighted by somebody and like they were basically just like, "No, you didn't hear that. That didn't happen." And just realizing like when I pushed on it, they were like, "Nope, I'm not doing this. I'm leaving." And I was just like, "Okay,
Mm.
okay, you can go." Like, don't like you can try and spin it how you want, but I called it out. So I think before I'd be like, "Oh no, no, it's fine, it's fine. Oh,
You would
maybe I
have
did
backed
hear
down.
that, maybe that didn't." And whereas now I think when I'm more firm, like you said, I think then it's like, oh, you're being a villain, or kind of you're being difficult. Oh, how dare you call me out like that? Oh, I'm not dealing with this sort of thing.
Mm.
Uh, and it's tough because I think that's made me kind of lose friendships or relationships quite quickly, or um, even I think just boundaries with myself.
Mhm.
Because I think with that kind of backtracking, it's almost a sense of like, oh, my reality didn't matter. And I think especially with BPD, like I think it's like 70%, a lot of it is coming from a chronically invalidating environment.
Mm.
And so I think unlearning that, because I think again, kind of being away from the hometown and stuff, like again, I think even talking to my therapist, I'm constantly reflecting on kind of things that have happened throughout my life. And I did some inner child work the other evening, which was very interesting.
Mhm.
Um, once I got over the initial, like, oh, I'm talking to myself, this is really weird, because I was like sat on the floor. Um, like it was quite an emotional experience. Even just talking to my inner child, because there wasn't many people that were maybe aware of things that were happening when I was growing up, and the people that were, like, they didn't intervene, but because they had their own stuff going on, it almost just felt like nobody was really looking out for me, and so it was quite a tough thing to kind of talk to my younger self and be like, "You know what? Like, you didn't deserve that kind of treatment from people, or, you are good enough as you are." Because I think especially, going to school, being bullied, that's when you are developing your sense of self.
Yeah.
And that's when your brain's developing. And so when you have all these messages of like, oh, you misbehave, you're naughty, you should not like do anything wrong. I think especially because I have two very much older half siblings where like they were adults when I was still a kid.
Mhm.
And that I think they wanted me to be treated like an adult even when I was a kid. And
Had to grow up too quickly.
yeah, but I think it was this thing where they wanted me to grow up, but at the same time, they kind of didn't think I was capable of anything.
Mm.
But they were like, "Oh, we expect you to know these things. We're not going to show you, but also you can't do it. But if you do it, it's not good enough." So then
Lots
I
of
kind of learned,
conflicting
okay,
messages.
fine, I won't do it. I'm not gonna. I'll let someone else do it,
Mm.
and then I still can't win. So I think it was my last therapist before I moved. Like he was saying that it just sounded like five strangers living in the same house.
Mm.
There was no real kind of connection. I think everyone just had their own stuff going on. But I think what really helps with my new therapist is that he's also gay as well. So I think that helps in a sense of there's different obstacles to kind of go through. I think when you are a gay man,
Mhm.
that maybe a straight therapist might not be able to kind of empathize with as much. I think especially gay dating is terrible, so terrible. But I think especially around that shame and trauma of
Mm.
you might come out, or kind of people's opinions on coming out,
And the
or
the fear of reactions, the fear of other people's
mm,
reactions. I like to look at things the opposite way around. We're social creatures. Human
mm,
beings are social creatures, and we all have this need to belong, to fit in. That's why
mm,
we, have relationships. We live in communities. We join groups and things like that. It's not always the need to be accepted, which is hardwired into all of us.
mm,
It's the fear of being rejected.
mhm,
We don't handle rejection well. But the thing about rejection is, and I find this very curious, this is really why I wanted to talk to you today because I'm fascinated by this, really interested in this. You've taken you've taken to comedy, as you say, and I remember a while ago you'd had mentioned, I remember you posting it on Twitter as it was at the time, about the Jekyll and Hyde.
mhm,
You were in the Jekyll and Hyde performance and you were nervous about doing it, but it was like you were trying to push yourself out of your comfort zone. It's like you were trying to prove something to yourself. You are capable and so on. But since that, you've moved into comedy as well. And
mhm.
I think comedy is a very interesting thing to move into. We chatted briefly before, but the thought of comedy, that would terrify me. You're really at the mercy of the audience, whether they get you or they don't. What
Yeah.
really interested you in the comedy?
Um, I mean, to be honest, I think some of it, I think everybody has it at some point where they're kind of laying in bed being like, "Oh, I could do a stand-up set." But I think also I've often been told I'm quite funny. And I think mental illness helps with that. to be
Some of
honest.
your, I will say, some of your skits, your little sketch things on TikTok are quite funny. The little things you put up.
Thank you. Um, yeah, and I think even talking to my therapist about it, I think part of it, because I think especially with my stand-up stuff, it's either kind of talking about stuff that I've been through or kind of what my upbringing was like, and even just again, just shit dating experiences or things like that. I think it was a way of me like reclaiming my power from situations that I've been
Yeah.
in.
Uh-huh.
And that's the thing, 'cause, you're kind of talking about, like you kind of get good crowds, you kind of get bad crowds, and yeah, I think so. I remember my first show was I think July last year, and what I mean, what didn't help. So I think the initial date had been postponed. I almost saw that as like, oh, that means I shouldn't do it. Fine, but I was like, yeah, sure, kind of just go along with it, and like I think every day up until now, I was like, I'm gonna do it. I'm not gonna do it, and even on the day was like, "Oh, I'm gonna go. Yeah, it's gonna be fun." Then I'm like, "No, I'm gonna cancel." "Oh no, I'm gonna do it." And I'm really glad that I did kind of push through with it because it was a good experience. I think I've always been like a creative person. I think I've always wanted to do performing of some sort, and I think being able to work with stuff that I've been through or just
Hmm.
life and at the end of the day, people were always used to laugh at me, so I was like, "Hey, you might as well laugh with me now." Um,
Well, there is something in that. I mean, you mentioned a moment ago about reclaiming your power.
mm,
First of all, I think it can be quite healthy to be able to laugh at the ridiculous nature of life,
mhm,
to be able to laugh at absurdity. If
mm,
we just laugh at everything, it's not that good. It's not that healthy. So we need to find a balance. But there is something as well, as you said, about reclaiming your power, because you said about, people are going to laugh anyway. The difference is with a comedian on a stage, they're controlling the laughter.
mhm,
They're controlling what they laugh at, and the crowd are laughing with them, not necessarily
mhm.
at them. They're, if you will, that self-deprecating humor. They're laughing at their own silliness, their own absurdity, whatever it is, or the silly, awful, weird, whatever kind of situations they're in, and the audience is laughing along with them, not at them. And there is something quite powerful in that.
Yeah, and I think, so I think one of the early shows I did, there was because I think a tricky place with this venue is that it was an open mic night, but it was, like, in a pub, so not everyone was there for comedy, and so there was a couple of, like, these guys kind of shouting stuff at everybody that was, like, performing and, kind of typical, like, cocky guys being like, "Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah," and, like, kind of low-key homophobic stuff. Was like, "Oh, yeah, he's my boyfriend," and all that stuff,
I'll
and
hazard to guess the type of person who doesn't want to get up and talk at the mic.
yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Literally, I think, because part of my set is talking about homophobia, and, like, literally, as soon as I started talking about that, they walked out. So I was like, "I've saved the day, everyone, you're welcome." Um, so I had a show where just I didn't do very well, like, I think I ended up doing, like, 2 minutes of my 5-minute set, but, like, the light was in my eyes, I couldn't see anyone, and it just wasn't a good crowd, I think, it's hard, I think especially early on,
Hmm.
like I am, it's hard to be like, "Oh, is it just the crowd or is it, it's not a good joke?" And, um, it's definitely stuff where I'm like, "Oh, no, that's not good." But also, like, learning kind of who your audience would be,
Mhm.
and also, like, for me, 'cause, one of my best shows, so, it was in a place called Farnham, and initially when, like, the crowd was coming in, I was like, "Oh, they all look like quite posh people. I don't think they're gonna like my stuff." And, like, they loved it, like, a lot of people came up to me being like, "Oh, that was amazing," "Be cool to see you have your own kind of special thing," and I'm like, "Maybe, we'll see." Um which was interesting considering I was like, "Oh, I don't know if this crowd is gonna be very good." And then
Mm.
they wanted me to go back, so I closed for them last week. No, this week. It's been a long week. But I think even, if even talking about this now, I don't want it to seem like I'm kind of bragging or anything, I'm just kind of saying what happened, and,
Why
uh,
not?
that was the thing with my because like, my therapist was like, "You're allowed to be proud of yourself." I'm like, "But that makes me cocky." He's like, "No, you're not, like, being like, 'Oh, you're the best ever.'" I'm like, "No." Um, but
Think of what the difference between having a sense of pride in your
mm,
accomplishments, your abilities, and arrogance.
mhm,
They're very different things.
mhm. Yeah, but I think that's helped because I think, like you said, kind of having to get up on that stage. Now that I've kind of tried both, obviously acting and stand-up comedy, but I think for me it's easier doing the comedy weirdly. Because I
Mhm.
think before I tried it, I thought, oh, acting will be easier because you're not being yourself. So I think obviously with your stand-up set, you still kind of have to remember it.
Mhm.
But obviously with acting, you kind of have to remember lines. You have to kind of stay in character. You kind of got to do this. Whereas like with comedy, you kind of riff a bit or make fun of yourself. And I think also what's helped as well. I think even obviously when I go to shows, I'm watching other people, and so I think laughter is just such a great mood boost, and
Oh,
like
yeah.
it
Laughter is
helps so
infectious.
much. And like I recommend anyone go to a comedy show. Um, because I think talking to my therapist as well was about kind of getting positive feedback, I think, because I haven't had that really.
Yeah.
And so it's like validation seeking, I guess. But I think also that immediate feedback
Mm.
when you say something, someone laughs, whereas like if it's other stuff, you're like, oh, I don't know. And so you're like, oh, that works. And I think just noticing that I'm getting better as well. So I think actually my favorite process was getting that first 5 minutes set, because I had these kind of abstract ideas of like, I want to tell a joke about this, I want to do that, and then it's like, oh, I've got that one, but how can I weave it into this? And I actually quite liked that creativeness of it. So,
Yeah. I'm not an expert, I'm not gonna pretend to be, but I'm just gonna imagine. Um, with acting, yeah, you have a script and the director's telling you how to deliver the line, the tone of voice, body language, movements, all that sort of thing. With comedy, if you're up on stage, there is something of a persona. Uh,
mhm,
there is something of a persona. So there is maybe a little bit of acting in both, but both still do require, if you will, maybe different parts of us to have to come to the surface in order to fuel that persona.
mhm,
And it could be the silliness, it could be anger, it could be confusion, it could be, whatever, say, if you're acting, whatever the motivation is.
mm.
And even how you deliver something in a comedy routine, there are still going to be bits of us that come to the surface.
Yeah. I think it's another interesting aspect of not even just the comedy, but I think like moving away is finding out what my personality is, but
Hmm.
also not trusting kind of my bully's perception of me, or like, sorry, there's a fly,
Hmm.
because they didn't find anything positive in me. So why would I see that in myself if they're constantly like, oh, you're not good enough, you're lazy, you're stupid, you don't know anything. Especially when you're around that
Mm.
for so long. Because I think there was even kind of glimpses where there was like there's a particular friend that I still have from childhood, but I just didn't see her as often back then. And I think even then I subconsciously noticed the difference of, when I walked away from seeing her, like, I felt good, kind of energized, like, oh, that was a really nice time. Versus, whether it was like family or other friends, just like, I feel terrible,
Mm.
exhausted. I just need to go lie down. I can't kind of function. And, because I've done, I think also last year, I've done stuff for the Human Library where it's kind of talking about my experiences.
Mhm.
And, one of the questions I constantly got was, could I have a relationship with my family or other people? And my answer was kind of, well, they're still not willing to acknowledge things.
Mhm.
But also, they never had a nice thing to say about me. Why would I want to go back to that? And I think that's another thing I sort of do kind of put in my comedy thing of kind of being scapegoated. And because I think, yeah, it was last year at some point, I was walking and somebody like tapped me on the bum with a bag, and it was like one of my relatives that I'd not seen for 2, 3 years. They had been kind of leaving comments on things and stuff. But they acted like nothing happened. Like, "Oh, hello, how are you? What have you been up to?" And I think when you are estranged, I think there's so much of it where, like, in your head, you're like, "Oh, if I ever see them, I'll kind of call them out on it. I'll do this." But I think it was just such like a, "Oh, I wasn't expecting that." Like, then I
Mm.
kind of go back into that kind of fawn response of like, "Oh, yeah, I'm fine. Oh, how are you? What are you up to?" And, "Yeah, I'm good. Yeah, oh, what's going on with you?" And kind of rather than being like, "Oh, I'm gonna walk away." I don't know, because I was talking to my therapist as well about that I just don't feel connected to family or anything, just because I don't I never felt that love there.
Yeah.
they may still have, I can't tell other people what their version of love is
Mm,
or whether they love someone or not, but I never felt it. I never felt valued or heard. Even if I came with a problem or like, "Oh, this upset me," or "This happened," it's like, "Well, what did you do?" Or "Maybe you didn't do this. Maybe you should have done this." And,
yeah.
um, never felt heard. And I think that's also what's been, to be honest, healing, I think, about friendships and stuff that I have now is that, I had one of my friends. I mean, I feel sorry for my friend because, like, he came with me all the way to my show on Wednesday, but because he was going to Poland, he had to get a certain train home, but the show overran, so he never got to see me, which was gutting because I think literally as he was like, "I'm gonna go," they called me up. But I think just it was nice that he wanted to do that,
Yeah.
kind of come and
That's,
support and
that's what I was saying earlier about how there is something, it might feel odd at first, but there is something about being treated as if you're of some value. Be just even being treated like a normal, decent human being.
mhm,
There is something very empowering in that, and just as you were saying earlier about the difference between meeting a friend and feeling energized, you were glad to see them, a bit of camaraderie and things like that, and then meeting others and you're feeling tired, exhausted, and drained.
mhm,
I don't want to say anything that I'm sure you're not already aware of. I'm sure you've talked about this in your therapy. The difference is in different relationships, we're not having to be on guard. We're not being vigilant. We can
mhm,
relax and be a bit more ourselves. And if somebody does or says something, yeah, we can shrug it off. It's a bit of a joke. It's a laugh because we know that goes both ways. Just it's playful banter, whatever.
mhm,
And then there's other relationships where people can do and say things and act in a certain way, but we get a sense it's not banter, it is very personalized.
mhm. Yeah, because there was a particular, like, friendship that I had growing up where there was constant kind of, like, I've spoken to people about this, and, like, a lot of people have been like, they were not a friend,
Mm,
uh, because there was a lot of kind of passive aggressiveness, there was a lot of kind of homophobic comments and, "Oh, but I'm allowed to say that because 'cause I'm your friend," and I actually went to a college reunion last week,
mhm,
which I was very apprehensive about because at that point so it was when I went back to college, I was seeing someone and he didn't like my college friends. And he was like, "They won't be friends with you in 2 years. They don't like you. Why would you do that for
yeah,
them? They're not gonna do that for you." And then I drop out because kind of got in the way. And then as soon as I dropped out, he was like, "Oh, maybe, I was being a bit too harsh. You could go back." And also had like a friend where they didn't like if I had other friendships. They'd
mm,
be like, "Oh, I don't like them. They're trying to take you away." And then they move like a year later.
yeah,
And I don't know, like, again, I probably should have had more of a backbone when I was a bit younger, but like I was very much like quite a shy, kind of like, oh, to kind
mm,
of take everything on. And I think certain people or certain personalities kind of take advantage of that. Where like, oh, we can, you know, this person once said to me that they liked being in control of people and that they
mhm.
liked making me feel uncomfortable. And
They're quite open about it then.
yeah,
This is the thing, when you find yourself out of the environment that hurt you,
mm,
if we're not paying attention, we miss the little things we are doing to grow. Now, you said about, growing a spine and so on.
mm,
When we were talking earlier on, you were telling me about having the confidence to set your boundaries.
mhm.
Some people listen to them, they respect them. Some people don't. They just, bugger off or whatever. Does that not take a level of confidence and a level of courage? If we don't pay attention to the little differences, the things we do for ourselves, yeah, we listen to a different kind of music. We start eating different kinds of food. We might want to cook things from scratch. We'll want to try something we've never tried before. We might start to dress differently. You find different interests like comedy, acting, things like that. When we're out of the environment that hurt us, what happens is I think we start to get to know ourselves a bit better, and we start to. I love. There's another therapist on YouTube. I spoke to him one time. This is his phrase. I so wish it was mine. We start to live in defiance.
Mhm.
You do things in your own best interest, and if we're not paying attention to those little things, sometimes it can feel as if we're still stuck. We're not. We are actually growing. We're developing.
Yeah, and I think even just thinking of, even the past like 5, 6 years, like with kind of healthier coping mechanisms, at first you're like, oh God, I don't know how this is ever gonna help me, you know. Or even I think actually for me it's kind of weirdly been the other way around with things that I had as a coping mechanism. So I still do, I still love going out for walks and stuff. But I think now that I'm in my own environment away from things, I actually quite like being at home.
Hmm.
Whereas I think before I'm going out for walks like 4 or 5 times a day, because I'm kind of cooped up in my room or, again, the energy doesn't feel great, so I'm gonna
Mm.
go out and go for a walk. Whereas now I'm happy to be at home. I almost saw, like, walking as like, "Oh, that's just me," because I think, I used to be known as, like, the gay guy that walks around listening to music. Like, people would always see me, and then they'd be like, "Oh, it's weird you're listening to music." I'm like, "Okay." Uh, but no, I think just, yeah, being out that I think you said, like, living in defiance. I think even when I told people before, I was like, "I wanna get into performing," or, even when I went to do performing arts at college, one of my family members was like, "Oh, you won't do that. You won't kind of survive past Christmas. You won't do all this stuff." And even when I was, like, doing, like, videos before, like, they're like, "Oh, how are your little videos going?" Kind of quite
Mhm.
condescending, and all of a sudden, like, those same people are like, "Oh, congratulations on this milestone or this," and I'm like, "Okay, okay, thank you. I haven't forgotten what you've said before." And I think this is the tricky thing, I think with it's good, I think, again, mental health and stuff is being talked about a lot more, but it kind of does rub me the wrong way a bit, where the same people that were calling me attention seeking for doing it are now like, "Oh, that's amazing." I'm like, "Cool, again, it's great. You've learned, but convenient, you've forgotten." Uh, but we'll ignore that. Um, just the overall society of people talking about it, I'm just glad that is happening. So I think even, yeah, like when I was a teenager and stuff, that like nothing really. I think especially around mental health, and I think back when I was at school, there was still this thing called connections, where you would talk to somebody sometimes. But I think it still very much wasn't seen as like, oh, mental health is a good thing to talk about. It's a good thing to kind
Mm.
of open up about. I think especially things that aren't just depression, anxiety,
Yeah.
whether that's intrusive thoughts or BPD, PTSD, and because I think things really do shape us, like our experiences. But also, again, it's just kind of there's nuances to
Yeah.
um, people's situations or people's behaviors, and it's ironically it's gone very black and white, which is very ironic to me.
It's not that not necessarily the health view. I mean, I agree it is good that we talk about mental health and things like
Mm,
that. I think it's about how we're talking about it.
mhm,
Because sometimes we might be having a normal, natural reaction to
yeah.
something. I'm not trying to trivialize it, but um, mental health is not feeling good about everything all day and every day.
Mhm,
It's okay to feel a bit low sometimes. We can feel tired. We can
mhm.
feel disappointed. We can feel angry. They're not necessarily mental health problems. So I think it is about how we're talking about it. And I think the fact that it is being talked about is a good, healthy thing.
Yeah, and I think that's why, like, I try because, like, I haven't done as much mental health content. I think just because I think I'm still very much, like, interested in that, but I think I do want to focus on other aspects. But I think
Mm.
I think I try and be careful with what I do put out there.
Mm.
Because again, like that, people might trivialize kind of like, oh yeah, toast is trauma. And, so I kind of don't want to contribute to that kind of thing. And I think this is another kind of thing about me though, where then I'm like, "Oh, but then I don't want to trivialize, but I don't want to, like, invalidate people's stuff. So if toast is
Back
trauma,
to
then that's fine."
it goes back to the fear of making an error, fear of making a
Mm,
mistake.
mhm,
Again, just like we're always going to be somebody's villain,
mm,
we're never going to get everything right, especially in a world that thinks very all or nothing, black or white, right or wrong, yes or no.
mhm,
Um, it's we're always going to make some kind of error. We're always going to get something wrong, and someone's going to have an experience that contradicts ours.
mhm.
That's perfectly fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think especially with I think my generation a bit younger, kind of growing up with social media and stuff, I think everyone's kind of become desensitized to how they talk to people,
Mhm.
or again, kind of unfortunately, I think I've probably engaged in it a few times. I think, like, I've seen it on, like, I try not to, but I see it on Twitter a lot, where it's like these smear campaigns because somebody tweeted this, like, when they were 12,
Yeah.
or one mistake they've made is like, this person's terrible, let's cancel them. And but when it's just okay, they said you've like blocked them, and then you're doing this smear campaign because they said one thing you don't like,
Mm.
okay. Again, I think especially in the past when I've not kind of not thought about it properly, I probably have engaged in things like that. But I think now I just kind of make a conscious decision of, okay, have they said this thing? Like, I might not like, I can unfollow them, but I'm not then going to post this massive thing about it. I'm like, cool, I don't want to see their stuff anymore. But I think that's the other thing. I think, unfortunately, with that moral scrupulosity with social media, where you're like, oh, but if I say this one thing, like, I'm gonna kind of be doxxed and all this thing, these things, and
Again,
you know,
it's missing the context, missing the
yeah.
nuance. And some people, and just like you say, I would be guilty of this too sometimes. You read a line, a few lines, or you see a 30-second video or a 5-minute video, and it's almost like you just form this version of them in your head.
Mm,
And
mm.
that's what they're attacking, the version that they form in their head, not
Yeah, and I
necessarily.
think that's what's tricky. I think again with so again, I think it's good that we have all this kind of like narcissism content, but at the same time you do have people being like, oh, you see this 1 2 minute video, that means they're a narcissist because they did this thing. And I'm like, but where's the rest of it?
Yeah, yeah,
Because like, I've seen some, I don't know if it's okay to say, but whether like some narcissist creators are just narcissists themselves. Like, because I've seen this thing, like, I've seen it on TikTok
yeah,
especially, where there's somebody that does all these things that this person's a narcissist, and they'll be like, "Well, if" I've literally seen them be like, "Well, if you disagree with me, then I'll say that you're gaslighting me, and I'll assume you're a narcissist."
yeah.
So there was one video where I think she was talking about gaslighting or something. I left a comment being like, "Oh, Dr. Ramani has this great video about the nuances of this situation," and the comment got deleted. I was just like, "I was just trying to help." So, and it's just
Yeah.
I think that's the other thing with, like, trying to navigate kind of OCD stuff. It's like it feels like it's getting thinner, thinner, and thinner, and thinner until it's like, step slightly out of line, you're a terrible person. You've gotta be this fine line.
But I'm
Mm.
wondering, given what we've been talking about today, what's the future like?
Oh,
Bit of a
um,
big question, but where do you see yourself going from here?
um, I mean, I think I'd like to pursue my comedy a bit more. I think it's although it's I think it's still in that stage where I'm like, "Oh, I haven't got many lined up, maybe I shouldn't do it," or, "I don't know, like, still is it good?" Um,
Well, actually, that's probably not a bad thing. I mean,
mhm,
if you were I'm guessing, but if you were to go out on stage and you do a set, you tell a few jokes, and you get a good crowd, you get a good response. You could be thinking, well, maybe I was just lucky.
mm,
Or you go out and you have a night and maybe it's awful, maybe no one laughs, maybe they're all too drunk, to even hear you or whatever.
mhm,
You think, well, there you go, there's the proof. Why am I even bothering?
mm,
But if you were going out and you were thinking, I'm absolutely fabulous. I am completely amazing. I am the next big thing. What do you see? I'm going to be doing sellout
yeah.
tours and this, that, and the other. That's probably not so healthy either. I think a healthy level of self-doubt is what we all need. It's, if you will, it's a level of humility. We have to learn more. We never do anything perfectly. I don't think perfection exists. We can do things well.
I think what's helped, I think, especially when you do have that kind of one set to start
Mhm,
with, it's kind of when you do take it different places, I think you start to be like, "Okay, well, that works with this kind of audience, or this bit doesn't work, I'm gonna have to change that or completely take that out, but these bits are really good.
mhm.
These bits always land." And but yeah, I think I probably will pursue it a bit more. I think I just like that it is an outlet for me, and it gives other people a good time. So it helps people laugh
And
at
from
me.
what I've seen of some of the things you put up, looking at you from the outside, by the way, you do seem you do seem quite relaxed, quite at home on stage.
I'm dissociating the whole time, but but no, I think some people are, you've got good stage presence, and I'm just
Mm.
sort of being a bigger version of myself. But no, I am currently sort of like job hunting at the moment because I lost my job a month or two ago, unfortunately, because of they changed owners and they let some people go. So just doing that. But yeah, I think definitely I'd like to do more of the comedy stuff, I think. I think especially the more I do it,
Yeah.
and, slowly getting messages of like, "When's your next one? I wanna come and see it," and kind of I'm like, "Cool, there's a bit of demand there." Because I think, again, I think from being younger, I was always a kind of performing person, I'd kind of dance
Mm.
in front of the TV or I'd sing and
Yeah.
things like that, and I think, again, kind of just unfortunately, just life happened, and I was just like, "Oh, maybe I shouldn't do it," or, "These people say I can't do it, so maybe I shouldn't." Whereas now I think I'm very much taking the reins of my own kind of life and being like, "Nope, this is what I wanna do. I don't care, if this person doesn't like it, that's fine."
Wow. It's like we
And
were talking about earlier. You start to live in defiance.
mhm, and it seems to be working so far.
Well, listen, you see, whenever you are incredibly famous, you have your own TV specials and you're doing tours. I do expect VIP tickets. What is it you call it? You know, the t-shirt merchandise and selfies and things like
Of course.
that.
Expect that in the next 10 years. We'll
Well,
see.
listen, seriously, I think it's something, if you do stick at it, it's entirely up to you. Whether you want to do it professionally, you want to go into that realms, or if it's something you just want to do at the level you're doing at. It's something you seem to be enjoying. It's something you seem to have a knack for. So good for you. And as I said to you earlier before we were even recording, it takes a level of courage that I certainly wouldn't have. So good for you.
Thanks very much.
Ron, thanks for chatting today.
Thanks
It's
for
been
having
really
me.
good to catch up with you. You take care. Brian's content can be found on both YouTube and TikTok, where you can find both his mental health advocacy and his comedy content. I'm Darren Magee, and thanks for listening.